All right. So I'm Saeed, and I teach creative nonfiction in the MFA program. Are you taking a video? I love it. So very, very pleased. We have David Adjmi today. And I'm excited to have him here tonight for a lot of reasons. One of them is that he is an acclaimed playwright as well as being a memoirist. And as all of my students know, we just had a nice discussion about it. I talk ad nauseum every semester about how various art forms intersect and inform. David's the author most recently of the memoir Lot 6, which he'll be reading from tonight, followed by a Q&A. And we have, don't forget in the back, books for sale. Is that Shakespeare & Co.? No.
I believe so.
Okay, I believe so.
Yes.
All right, shout out for Shakespeare & Co.
And Christina.
What's that?
And Christina.
And Christina, thank you, Christina. Thank you for doing it. So books he'll be signing afterwards. Okay. So one of the most powerful things about David's work is that he is able to see both himself and the world. That's another thing we talk about in class. The personal and the political. He's from Brooklyn, Jewish, gay, of Syrian descent, schooled in a yeshiva. In his memoir, he writes with great honesty about hoping to be an artist, always feeling like an outsider, even within his family, or especially within his family. But notice that this is the same author who can also write so convincingly about, who else? Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, 18th century, middle of the Revolution, polar opposite of David. So disconnected, would that be safe to say? Polar opposite? All right, so disconnected from the outside world that she's saying, let them eat cake. David can see the particular human and also the world that made them that particular human. Among other acclaim, Lot 6 was, I wrote elected, was selected as one of the best, I have elections on my mind, was elected as one of the best books of the summer by the Chicago Tribune, cited as one of the best memoirs of the year by Booklist, selected as one of the most anticipated books of the summer by LitHub, Lambda Literary and Playbill. The Washington Post called it stirring and compelling. The New York Times said it's laugh out loud funny. He's also the author of numerous plays, including The Evildoers, Stunning, 3C, and, as I mentioned, Marie Antoinette. His plays have been produced all over, including at Lincoln Center, the Royal Shakespeare Company, Steppenwolf, and Soho Rep. His play Stereophonic premiered on Broadway in 2021. What? His play Stereophonic was delayed by COVID, but when's it going to be on Broadway?
2023.
2023. Okay, we've got some. Okay, next year. And the great theater critic Hilton Hawes said of David's plays, his work shows every indication of never falling into anything approaching predictability or self-caricature. David is the recipient of a Whiting Writers Award and a Guggenheim Fellowship, and he's also a professor of playwriting here in the MFA program. So if any undergrads here are thinking about being a playwright, you come to the right. When's the application for that? He doesn't even know. Well, look it up. You can apply for the MFA program for playwright. David will be your professor in the fall, right? He teaches in the fall. Okay. Perhaps the Washington Post summed up David's memoir the best. As Lot 6 assiduously charts David's life from early childhood through college, graduate school, and his career, the book becomes an immersive experience, not unlike theater. On every page, readers are tasked with asking themselves the terrifying, beautiful question, what is the story of a life? But actually, David himself probably summed it up best, literally, with the final line of his memoir, spoiler alert, 380 pages. David writes, quote, this is the last line, or at least that was what I felt on that dreamy summer night as my mother sat across from me, bathed in soft candlelight, eyes tucked inside sleepy lids, waiting with fragile expectation for my answer to her question, is that me? Is that me is a question I think is more pressing today than it has been in a very long time. And it's up to each of us to figure out how to answer it. And I'm very honored to present to you tonight, David Adjmi.
so happy to be here. And thank you for that beautiful introduction, Saeed. I guess what I'll do is start by reading a selection from my book, and then we could do a Q&A if that's what you want to do. But I should preface it by talking a little bit about this community that I come from, which is sort of kind of everywhere in New York and also nowhere. It's a very small, marginal, but kind of wealthy community of Syrian Sephardic Jews. I guess there's something like 10 or 20,000 in New York City. And Syrian Sephardic Jews are people who were kicked out of Spain during the Inquisition and then threaded themselves through the Middle East and then eventually came to Brooklyn. And so it's a community that's very, very insular. They have kind of their own idioms, language, slang. It's kind of very incestuous. And like I said, it's sort of, they're among us, but nobody really knows what this culture is, because it's not, it's a marginal group. So it's so marginal that I didn't really even know how to speak about it when I was growing up, because people know Jewish people as Ashkenazi Jews. But there are lots of different denominations of Jews, I guess. So anyways, in this section of the book that I'm reading, I sort of reference a couple of things about them. So Syrian Jews like to have their summer houses in a place called Deal, New Jersey, which is super swanky. You're nodding your head. You know about Deal, New Jersey? You know a little. It's a very ritzy place. So I reference that here. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, and I was raised in a part of Brooklyn called Midwood, and I went to a Jewish school where it was like a double curriculum. Like I started at 7 in the morning and took Hebrew classes and was there all night, and then had, homework in 20 classes and then started all over. So anyways, I reference some of these things in this. So this is a part of, this comes from the first section of my book. And I was very friendless for a long time, and then I made a friend. But the friend now, who was a very overweight boy with frizzy hair, who is not Syrian Jewish, has now begun a transformation. So this is sort of, this is that part of the book. Okay, it's called Somebody's Watching Me. On the first day of 7th grade, Howie, without fanfare or flourish, arrived in school wearing a new shirt. The shirt was in the vein of abstract expression. It was patterned with stochastically arranged pinwheels, multicolored frets, and zigzags. It was collarless, somewhere between a sweatshirt and a sweater. I thought it was magnificent. He looked like a different person in the shirt. He'd lost a bit of weight, and with the combination of the shirt and his new slimmed-down figure, Howie looked, for the first time since I'd known him, almost stylish. I hadn't seen this coming. I knew his wardrobe by heart, his every ecru sweater, his assembly line of beige slacks. So I was, if not hurt exactly, then somewhat stunned by this debut. He didn't share his new acquisition with me in advance, and I felt assaulted by the newness. Now that Howie had this pinwheel shirt, I felt a small crevasse open up ever so slightly, separating us. When I ran into him in the hall just before class, we made superficial conversation. I waited for him to call attention to his makeover, but he didn't say a word about it. He didn't ask what I thought of the shirt. He didn't ask me to tender my approval. I tried to feel happy for him for being fashionable and losing weight, though I dare not introduce either as a topic of conversation. I would feel too vulnerable congratulating him when he seemed quite patently not to need my congratulations. He blathered on about sugar-free brownies and fruity ice cream, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying because of the shirt. Because of the hidden registers of pain it tapped in me. I felt myself prowling for an advantage, some comparable treasure to flaunt in retaliation, but I owned nothing of value. I tried to hide my creeping envy. I tried slaloming around feelings that were invidious and unpleasant. I had a horrible summer, which was spent mainly without Howie, who'd been on vacation with his family, some dietetic spa in the Caribbean, while I'd been forced to go to a horrible Jewish day camp on Rockaway Beach. On weekends, my mother toted me to Deal to visit with Claudia Terzi or my Uncle Ralph with the expectation that these visits would broaden my horizons, and expose me to new friends who might break my bizarre attachment to Howie. We spent our days at the Deal Casino Club with a private beach where my uncle was a member. Syrian girls in gold bikinis and gold makeup strode languidly down the row of beach umbrellas with anodized expressions, their wrists garlanded with bangles, hair straightened to the point of lamination. I saw boys from school shooting one another with water pistols, swimming with their tans and Speedos, their bodies lacquered with Bain de Soleil. They were all developing muscle, but I kept my shirt on, ashamed of my pale torso and flab. Mainly I'd be ignored, but sometimes the boys would pepper me with rhetorical questions, things like, what are you doing here? And you go here? And why are you here? The questions implied that the Deal Casino was an inviolate sanctum, one I journeyed with my presence. Maybe everyone had some infrared capability, and there was some soiled, stained part of me I couldn't see. I tried to hide from the boys. I urged my uncle the following week to move to a different, less populated section of the beach, but the boys found me there too. Something changed that summer. There was a new ruthless curation, a reordering of existing hierarchies. I felt spotlit under some new and very harsh criteria. At school, Howie functioned as a buffer to social anxieties, but now I saw he could tire of my novelty. He could become fatigued by whatever abstract gifts I possessed. He could abandon me altogether. The pinwheel shirt seemed to herald something terrible. Would Howie become stylish? Would he supersede me? The fragile succession of these bleak thoughts led me to unspool in the middle of the hall. Why do you look like you're going to cry? I can't do the Brooklyn accent, sorry. Why do you look like I tried to do it today when I was practicing and it sounded so fake, but it was real at the time. Why do you look like you're going to cry? Said Howie. I didn't sleep good last night, I said, trying to keep it together. I then noticed that the balled up Brillo pad of his hair had mysteriously unknotted itself into a sharply angled pillar of spikes. Your hair looks different. My mother taught me how to burn my hair with a towel, he said, and I put mousse. What's mousse? Hair mousse. You never heard of studio mousse? Maybe I heard of it, I said, but I hadn't. I felt so deficient. I hated the way he posed the question. How he stood with his hand on his hip. His posture seemed different, straighter. He seemed to have it all together. It was driving me crazy. Where did you get that shirt? I blurted, my voice involuntarily dipping into a register of hard accusation. Lester's, he said. And again, there was a slight glibness in his tone, like it was no big deal, even though he'd never before shopped at Lester's, even though his mother had only ever taken him clothes shopping at a discount outlet in Borough Park, even though Lester's, like Caravel and Deal and the casino, was essentially the exclusive property of Syrians, and Ashkenazi Jews like him had no real claim on it. Lester's was in fact the height of Syrian glamour. Everyone wanted the cachet that came with carrying their signature yellow and black plastic bag. The store existed in a particularly dilapidated and unsavory stretch of Coney Island Avenue, across the street from what was once a porn theater and was now a McDonald's. But amidst this gray wasteland, Lester's grew into a mini empire, ultimately usurping an L-shaped piece of real estate that extended all the way around the block. It became a haven for SYs. The clothes were chic, and it was well known that Syrians didn't have to pay tax. But even with this tax break, Lester's was one of the places my mother couldn't afford. Or if she could, I was asked to skim from ugly piles of sales clothes from the boys and husky section. And she would try to convince me how great I looked in bad outfits. If I balked, she'd guilt me into liking things. There's nothing wrong with that shirt. I vetoed a pair of pants, she'd override me and ask practical questions like, does it fit you in the tushy? On every car ride home, I'd feel sick, knowing I'd be made to wear more unstylish clothes. I had no control over what I wore and how I looked. My clothes were shitty. My shoes were ugly. I was sent to school in wrinkled flannels and corduroys worn to nubs. I was roundly criticized by my classmates for my awful sense of style. I was asked why I dressed like poverty and condemned for not owning sweaters. I couldn't participate in the Izod Polo Wars, an internecine fashion battle that erupted in my homeroom class, and was exempted from all considerations of wealth and pomp. My lack of control over my appearance and the reactions it garnered had become a near constant source of anxiety. I couldn't hide, and I didn't belong anywhere. And now Howie could shop at Lester's and supersede me. And he wasn't even Syrian. It wasn't his heritage. It was mine. And though I wanted to reject it, once he embraced it, I felt blindsided. I felt like I was being robbed of something, like I'd been mugged. The conversation with Howie was dislocating, but everything in my life felt dislocated that fall. Everything was in flux. Transformations were happening all around me in their carbuncular oiliness and ugliness. People I'd known for years were now strangers. Nechama Poland had cut off her long braid and now had a short bob and the faint hint of a mustache. Elisa Goldman had a mustache too. Joshua Fogel's face lengthened and thinned incomprehensibly. He looked like he'd contracted some weird illness that somehow made him more handsome. Ugly people suddenly became beautiful. People who were beautiful morphed into troglodytes. It was unpredictable, a kind of corporeal roulette. Bodies began to leak unwanted oils and secretions. They produced rotting smells. There were bumps and pustules and protrusions. My own face had broken out in hideous welts of cystic acne, and I'd recently sprouted hair from my nipples, a harbinger itself preceded by the appearance of two tiny lozenges under the aureoles that I thought were tumors. I spotted them in the bathroom following my shower, and sobbing in terror, sprinted downstairs to my mother. "I have cancer," I screamed. The following morning, she took me to see my pediatrician. I sat on a sheet of rustling paper loosely placed and crinkling loudly on the examination table as Dr. Deutsch felt the tumor-like masses. He then gazed at me over the crescental downturn of his giant nose. "That's not cancer," he cackled. "You're just in puberty." The instant he uttered the word, I felt sick. There was something proprietary in his tone, some perverse ownership over my body he was asserting with his terrible cackles and grimaces. I felt stripped of my humanity, like I'd been called a whore, and Dr. Deutsch was a sadist administering puberty, inciting it as part of some secret unethical experiment. When he saw my reaction, he patted me on my naked shoulder and laughed even harder. I looked up and could see the gray hairs jutting out from the ovoids of his laughter-descended nostrils. My mother sat on a tiny black stool and lit a cigarette while I put my shirt back on. In the clinical office, with its puke green walls and jars of tongue depressors, I could feel the ghosts of all the other children told of their puberty like they were specimens, mealy worms spawning uncontrollably in a glass cage littered with pencil shavings. We were on a relentless treadmill of human evolution. This was the ugly and dehumanizing overture to some terrible opera to come. After that day, puberty and its stirring perils were my sole concern. Spidery black hairs began to cover my milk-white legs. I noticed a milky substance in my ejaculate that hadn't been there before. Life was a nightmare, and I couldn't make the nightmare stop. My depression worsened. My scoliosis matured significantly. I walked with my hunched shoulders and with my coat on always. I wore it like a carapace indoors and out in warm and cold weather. It was my protective armor. I kept my gaze fixed downward, avoided eye contact. I was becoming a man, and manhood was destroying me. My bar mitzvah was that spring, and the ceremony was at the Ahiezer Synagogue on Avenue S. Very chic. I remember sitting in the pews as a quorum of Jewish men wearing microscopic expressions hovered over me. My father, some uncle I barely knew. I looked like a boiled egg. My skin was impossibly white. My eyes beamed terror and discomfort. One of the men rolled up my shirt sleeve to reveal a naked white forearm with its sheath of incongruous tiny hairs. Then he and the others took turns wrapping my arm in a black leather strap, so S&M, connected to a black cube positioned near my shoulder. The cube, I assumed, contained one of those wrapped scrolls with biblical passages inscribed in miniature. And of course, I'd have to kiss it. I had to kiss everything. But the kissing was bereft of any affection. There was something uncaring in the ritual that reminded me of the strange hushed violence of my doctor's exam, the frigid chill of a stethoscope pressed against warm skin. One by one, the men took a turn of the strap, wrapping the leather tighter and tighter as the pain scaled my left arm. I looked to my father for some kind of sign of warmth or recognition, but he barely noticed me. He was a faceless stranger. He'd fused with the cabal of men. Any hint of individuation would break their grim unison. When they were done, the rabbi said something, then the men chanted in response. He said something else, and then a chorus of women who'd been totally silent up to them, I'd forgotten they were there, thundered with surprising violence, forcing my eyes upward to the mezzanine. I looked for my mother, but she was hidden in the tumble of raked hats. I imagined her up there, somber in her motherliness, watching mutely as I was taken from one column to another, from the world of epicene boys to the world of men, a border invisibly separating us forever. I was led to a dais where I stood, legs shaking, my poor arm battered and violated, and dutifully wailed my Haftarah portion in my thin, tiny voice. After the ceremony, as people congratulated my parents and my relatives all got caught up and dispensed barbed endearments, I sneaked away to the basement where the DJ was setting up. The party room had a darkly lustrous feel. It was strangely pagan. There were fluted pilasters, a disco ball. Dim, long walls were lined with panels of smoked mirror, each snaked with veins of pale gold. I stood before one in the Italian suit my father bought for some discount outlet in Long Island. My reflection intersected with beams from the overhead light, monobrow and pimples on full display, the gap in my teeth, a chasm that split my face in half. I hated the boy-man chimera I'd become. I felt humiliated by the ceremony, which wasn't really for me. It wasn't even for my parents. It was for some judiciary force that claimed our lives, a force I couldn't see, only feel. I didn't think it was God. It was something else. It was dark and ruthless and unforgiving. When the party was in full swing, I hid at a table anchoring bouquets of red and silver mylar balloons that matched the color scheme of the invitations. Richie and Stevie were smoking cigars with Morris Shalom. Debbie was vaunting about her calligraphy for the invitations. It's my sister-in-law. Arlene smoked Camel Lights, is my sister, and fended off compliments about her red dress she bought for $10 at Joyce Leslie because she had no money. She was very vocal about hating her dress. She said she felt low class. She didn't even want to come to the party. My sister was in a bad way. She was forced to move back home that winter because it turned out that Charlie, her husband, in addition to being an alcoholic, was addicted to drugs. And on one occasion, while inebriated, had an argument with Arlene, and in the heat of it, nearly dropped their newborn daughter, Lauren. And for my sister, this was the last straw. Okay. She had no money and no plan for her life. "You look stunning in that dress," said Debbie, who was bouncing her daughter to the beat of Vamos a la Playa. That was a big Syrian song. "This dress is a piece of shit," said Arlene. The DJ from 92 WKTU was in full swing now. The dance floor was getting crowded. "Ooh, it's my song," said Debbie when he played Somebody's Watching Me. "Stevie, dance with me." Stevie wore a brown suit and he'd grown a thin mustache. His shirt was unbuttoned to the solar plexus, his neck cross-hatched with gold chains. "Dance with yourself," he said, puffing on a cigar. She turned to me. "Dave, you want to dance?" I'd vowed never to dance publicly, though I knew how by watching Arlene practice disco at home. The idea of people watching and judging me, even if the judgment was positive and encouraging, filled me with dread. Debbie's body began to jerk at spasm and convulse with dance. "Let's boogie, Dave." She handed the baby to Stevie. "Ugh, no, I don't want to," I said, but it didn't matter what I wanted or didn't want. Debbie dragged me onto the dance floor. Everyone started clapping. The DJ made some comment over the speakers. My mother was saying, "Hillu, hillu." They could see my pimples. They could see the single undisrupted horizon of my eyebrows, like someone drew a thick line across my forehead in black marker. There was no way to shield myself from the draconian judgments. I searched for some nuanced way of complying without making a spectacle of myself. I swayed neutrally. I made tiny, unnatural movements with my arms and legs. Debbie was shockingly uninhibited. She was windmilling her arms, whipping her head around at unpredictable angles to hang Mickey, and shaking her fists like they were pom-poms. Even post-pregnancy, she had enormous reserves of energy. She was dancing slightly faster than the beat of the song, as if the song would catch up to her. Quantities of jewelry swung from her neck and banged in loud zirconium claps. Debbie's bravery made me slightly braver. I started to loosen up. The dance floor was getting fuller. Arlene was doing salsa moves in her $10 Joyce Leslie dress. She was dancing with Howie, who was spinning and swinging his arms and wiping pips of sweat from his forehead. My mother and father were dancing together. Harry Bloom was dancing with my cousin Grace, who wore a lavender off-the-sleeve taffeta dress. I'm crazy because I remember all this. The boys from my yeshiva were practicing their spins and poppin' locks and various arthropodal breakdancing poses. Nechama Poland was dancing with Danielle Sidner, who wore a long prairie skirt, and I am insane, and was jumping in rigid vertical bounces and repositioning her clunky glasses every few seconds. I didn't think people would show up, but everybody came. It didn't matter that no one was really close or got along with each other or liked their outfits or had not enough money. There was something about democratizing about the dance floor. Somehow we became the purest, truest versions of ourselves. And when Billie Jean came on, the feeling changed in the room. It was a song everyone wanted to dance to. Though I couldn't understand the narrative of Billie Jean, I felt the force of its urgency. There was something in the music that gripped the entire room like a fist. The song felt serious in a way that mocked the liturgy of the ceremony we just come from. The pressures encircling me lifted. I lost the feeling of being watched and became one with the music. I felt light as air. My skin melted away like dead weight. The dance floor was crowded with strange silhouettes, silk bodies, Partners slid from one to another. Whirls of refracted light showered the room like spinning bits of glitter. My hair was standing on end. My heart beat so hard, I thought my chest would explode. I was out of shape. I thought I might collapse, but I pushed my body to its limits. I became one with Michael Jackson. I became one with the gold chains, the slithering bodies and damp swaths of Armani. We were a single corpus, a single undulant body. We were bacchants, worshiping at the altar of disco. As I got more and more lost in the music, I felt myself reaching for something, not physically, but inside myself. I was reaching for something I couldn't name. A deep yearning broke open inside me like a dam. Thank you.
All right. Wow. I am just, wow. All right. Who has some questions for David? I know, we're all probably kind of blown away. I'm like, it was such a riveting reading. I mean, it was so alive and theatrical and real. Yes.
Hi, David. Thank you for being with us today. You sort of alluded to that, but I'm just really curious as to how you did remember everything in writing this memoir. I mean, it just seems like the details are so vivid and clear and dense. So yeah, what was that experience for you?
I don't really, I didn't know that I had this crazy memory until I wrote this, and then I showed it to my editor, Jonathan Burnham, we talked about the book over lunch, and he was like, how do you remember all this stuff? And I thought, look, don't we all remember these things? Like, I thought it was something that we all remember. I remember this, and I remember this chapter address and the thing. I mean, I don't really know how I do it, but I think maybe writers are sort of obsessive people with obsessive memories, or like archival memories more like it, so that I don't know how to explain it, but it's sort of like, I feel like sometimes I'm on the outside of life, or I'm in the outside of certain interactions, so that and I especially felt this when I was younger, so that instead of like having the experience of living it through, it was more like I was collecting experiences and then holding them for some, like a treasure. I didn't know I was doing it. It was just sort of how my mind worked. And so maybe, but I don't know if, I know other writers aren't like this. So I don't know why I like it, but there is something kind of fetishistic about my memory, clearly. Like, even as I was doing this, like, I was like, oh my God. And as I was reading, because I haven't read this in a long time, I was like, oh, that's right. I remember that. Like, I was remembering, I could relive it in my head. And these crazy girls that I went to the yeshiva with, like, I remember her repositioning her glasses. It's crazy. And I have such like a vivid, it's in my body somehow. It's kind of nuts.
When writing this, the whole memoir, sorry, hi David.
Hi.
Were there moments where you wanted to run from it? Like the memories are like the other person said was so clear and so colorful. Were there moments where it became too much and it was like, I don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah, I'm somebody who will move into scary feelings. I think because I think for me, it's a survival thing. Like, I always saw my family denying stuff. And the denial mechanism was the big thing. That's what I was taught. Like, you want to cope in life, just deny everything that's happening. And I saw it like take people down, and I was like, oh, this isn't good. So I have to be the opposite of that. And I have the capacity, like I have the wherewithal to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. And that became sort of my unspoken, tacit, like contract with myself when I became a writer. Like, that's who I'm going to be, because that's my gift. And also that's my survival, I think. And so, but to answer your question more fully, like, I did hit a point, like I sort of have no filter when I'm writing. So whatever the truth is, if I'm seeing it, I'm going to move towards it. But then it did become there. I do remember at one point I was driving, I was in LA, and I had like kind of a breakdown in my car, and I had to pull over because I think it was just getting to be too much, because I was remembering too many things and I was reliving it. And it's more intense than it is when you're reading the book. Like, when you're actually writing it, it actually is so overwhelming. to relive these things because you're reliving certain feelings that are so overdetermined. They're hard to really even express in the writing. So the writing is like the residue of this overdetermined complex of feelings that are inside of you when you're doing it. And I do remember reading a Donald Antrim piece in the New Yorker where he was like writing his book about his mother, and he went off the deep end and actually like committed himself. And I thought, ooh, this is an idea. Like I read it and I was like, you know, and then I was like really seriously at some point considering like, I don't want people to, and we talked about it this when I spoke to Saeed's class, like, you know, you don't want your family to get mad at you. You don't want people to be mad that you have to tell the truth. But that wore this like feeling like, oh, I'm going to be hated, which I grew up with my whole life. If I tell the truth, people are going to hate me. I think there was a pressure building up, and it wasn't just the memories. It was like the contest of these forces inside of me, the part of me that wants to please people and the part of me that wants to tell the truth were very much building up into a kind of pressure. So I did think like, okay, I'll give this money of my advance back and that'll be it. And this is too hard anyway. But then I sort of, a few days later, I was like, no, I've invested a lot of time. I have to finish this project. I have to just do it. So, and I'm glad I did.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for coming today. I was wondering if writing this memoir, therefore going off the last question, was therapeutic or healing in a way, as a means to becoming your authentic self.
That's a good question. My authentic self, I don't know what my authentic self is. So I can't fully say that that's what it did, but I will say there is something about the like remembering, literally putting back together your life in a narrative form, which is fiction, right? Because it's a construction. Like I am curating what I put in this. I'm sewing it together in a way that will give you a kind of coherence in this very compressed way that long form prose can do. There is something about making connections and like rebuilding arteries and sort of like there were parts in the book that made no sense when I was writing. I was like, then this happened. And it's like, well, how did I get there? And there was like this lacuna. Like I was like, what's there? How did I go from here to here? It doesn't make sense. And then in investigating that gap, I was like, oh, wait a minute. And then I had to dig into something that I didn't want to talk about maybe, or maybe I was unconsciously running from, to answer your question again. But so that is, and I guess what is healing? Like, I guess healing is confronting the truth and learning to accept it in its totality and embracing it, almost like embracing all of it, you know? And I talk about Nietzsche in this book, and this is totally Nietzsche. Like Nietzsche's all about saying yes to everything because everything is entangled together. So you can't choose what you're going to say yes to. You have to say yes to the whole thing. So I feel like that's what this gave me, as like a way of embracing it all and transmuting it into something that I find beautiful.
Hi, thank you for your reading, David. Following up on a keyword that you used and providing his answer, overdetermined feelings. Could you expand on how do you mean overdetermined?
I mean, I think it's so complicated to talk about, to really dissect and break down the full spectrum of the complex of thoughts and emotion that exists inside a person at any one given moment and take a snapshot, much less talk about how they flow through time, like diachronically. So I can only sort of pin down some of it when I'm writing. I used to be an intern for this director and writer, Richard Foreman, a theater director. I talked about him also earlier today. And he would say that, you know, that it was hard for him to identify a character's action in a play because if you wanted something, you often also wanted the opposite. And that was something that people couldn't engage with in contemporary drama. But there was no way to really talk about how much people wanted multiple conflicting things simultaneously or felt conflicting things all at once. And so I guess when I talk about overdetermination of feelings and stuff, that's like, this isn't my life. This is just what I knew how to get down with the tools and the craft that I have, with the limitations of language, or with the, how I could employ English language. But it's limited, actually. It's curated, and it makes sense. Like, I hope it makes sense. When you read it, it's coherent. But maybe the truer version wouldn't make sense. You know what I mean? It might be too incoherent because it would have too much fuzz or static or complication.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to ask a little bit of a craft question, which is the way that you balance specifically like very, very funny moments of pretty pure humor, sort of en route to something really emotionally searing, and whether like how you consider that in terms of pacing, how you consider that in terms of balance, and also whether that's something maybe borrowed from theater that you can, expand upon.
I think so much of that, my first answer would be, my first impulse is, it's just my sensibility. Like, and I also am someone, I'm pretty, like, my temperament is kind of like Dionysian or something. Like, I sort of it's very easy for things to bleed in and out of tones for me. And like, or the Chekhovian temperament of like laughing through tears, like that's how I was when I was little. And I think it's part of how I was raised. Like, that again was a survival strategy. But I also definitely, that was my optic. Like, I just saw things that way. So it wasn't something I crafted it. Like, I've got to make this part funny, and then this is sad. It just sort of, I think it organically happened, but maybe, and I don't remember going, ooh, this is too sad, let me like beef it up or something. I don't think I did that though. I think it just like went where it went. And some of it is like both funny and not at the same, like, when I was reading it, I was like, oh, it's kind of funny. Like that thing with the doctor, the mean doctor, like it's kind of disgusting, but it's kind of funny. Like, it depends on how you want to read it at the time. I don't know if people would laugh at it. Like they said, someone said it's laugh out loud funny. I'm like, is it? I mean, okay.
The New York Times.
Yeah, New York Times. Okay, all right. I said it, that's true.
So, hi, David. Thanks
Hi.
for coming. If it makes you feel better, you're not the only one that remembers things from the past.
People remember, right? There's
Yeah,
obsessive rememberers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Together.
I guess this is a two-part question. One of the big elements of your book is, being from a dysfunctional family and all the consequences from that. So my first part is like, what are the elements that helped you keep grounded in persevering through that dysfunctional family? And what is advice that you would give to anyone who is in a dysfunctional family, how to persevere through that?
It's a big question. I'm just a little scared to answer this. I don't want to like screw up someone's life. I coped terribly when I was a kid. I just had no coping mechanisms. And I wasn't one of these kids who was like, I'm going to stay home and write. I'm going to do my stories. Like, I didn't think I could write. Like, I didn't have any confidence. You know what I mean? I didn't believe I was and I was also kind of just inert. Do you know what I mean? I just wanted to lie around and watch Laverne and Shirley. I mean, I had no will to live, really. I don't know how I got through it, because it was so awful. But I do think maybe humor was a big thing for me, and laughing. And I had my friend in the book who had the pinwheel shirt. And we're still friends, and we still make each other laugh. And that was, I think, maybe comedy, like laughing, like turning it into a comedy. Because it is funny. It is. Like, the most hideous things are actually funny. So that's why when people say, like, on Twitter, how could you laugh at that? Don't make a joke. I'm like, but it's all funny and it's also not. It's both at the same time. But I think so that was a huge thing for me because no one taught me, like my mother, like if I failed at something, she'd be like, don't try that anymore. You failed. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, keep going. Like she still does it. Like I talked to her, oh, this didn't go well, honey, you have to try something else then. You know, just relax, go have a nice meal. Like it was like, so it's like, I didn't have like a way of breaking through. Like I didn't have a model for like, ooh, this could be a way for me to do something. There was no way to do anything. So for a long time, it was just like this, like blank, like I was staring at like a blank wall. That was my future. I was like, you know, and then I had, I saw a therapist. You know what I mean? I went to see a therapist and I started again to bring a narrative to my life, like to frame it. Okay, this is called dysfunctional, which at the time, like that was a new word. Or like Oprah brought it up or something. Like it was like, oh, dysfunctional family. What? Oh, this is something sounds familiar to me when I hear that phrase, you know, and it's like, okay, this is dysfunctional. So it's not normal. It is not functional. So what is functional? That was a big thing for me. Like what? Okay, that's not functional. So there must be something that is functional. What is it? And I started like looking when I got to college, especially looking at the people around me and going, I feel something different from them, like a stability or like a sureness that I don't have. I want that. Like, how did they get that way? How do they, and I sort of like imitated them. You know, I'd imitate people and think if I could like reverse engineer normalcy. You know what I mean? And it kind of worked a little bit. It kind of worked actually, because I just started sort of like looking at how their temperaments and how they addressed problems and stuff. So I can't say this is answering your question at all. I would just say go find a good shrink. That's really as long and short of it.
Sorry, one more. This is more about you as a writer and part about writing a story about your life as well. How do you say this is good enough to be released?
That's such a good question. Well, I mean, with this book, like it was an assignment, like I was commissioned to write it, I was given money, but I did take forever to do it. And what I do is I read the whole thing to myself eventually. And if I don't like flip out when I'm reading it to myself, it's good enough. And I also feel, you know what I mean? Like because sometimes when I'll read it, like I'll snag on a line or a phrase and I'll go, like, okay. So, you know, there's that. There's just the line by line thing where it has to read well to me. But I also think, I don't know, I feel like I have to trust myself that my investigation, that the rigor of my investigative faculties, whatever that is, like that I trust that rigor, that I know myself, that I know I'm not going to just stop and give a superficial analysis of something if I can go more deeply into it. And so I really feel like I have a conscience as a writer, and that my conscience gears me to really completing my task. And so I sometimes just feel it, like a bell goes off, like I think I did it. And it doesn't mean that it's perfect, but you know what? You don't want perfect because you want to feel the human hand. You don't want something that's like this, like entablature, you know what I mean? Like a piece of marble, and it's not porous so that the reader can't get in. You need to feel the humanity and the flaws and imperfection of the writer. So that gives me a lot of solace too, because it's like, you know what? It's never going to be there ever, because you can't think that way, because you have to make room for the next thing to be better. But then it also is good enough because it has to be.
If I can slide in a question, this a bit has to do with the previous question and Tori's question. When I was reading your book, I just felt there's this really intense narrative propulsion, like you really rocket us through this story. And hearing you read it, it was sort of like exponential, even more narrative propulsion. And so I'm curious about your writing process, if you're just sort of because at the same time, there's this forward intense momentum. There's also a lot of self-observation, reflection, and a little history. And yet there's still action forward scene and, dialogue and movement. There's really just a lot going on. And I'm guessing that there's sort of a structure built, and then you go back and build in some intricacies. But I guess I'm kind of curious to what extent is there, I guess there's a lot of building in afterwards, but I mean, there seems like there must be this just intense, just forward motion throughout the original narrative iteration, or I'm just kind of guessing, or what?
No, I
How
was
does it
telling
go?
Saeed's class this, that when I first gave the first draft to my editor, Jonathan Burnham, he was like, I really want to turn the page, but don't want, it's something like, no, I don't want to turn the page, but it's good writing. But I want to turn the page, like make me want to turn the page. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, that was his note. And we'd had lunch and I went home and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And I then reread what I gave him and I was like, oh, it's so boring. Like it was my first like memory. I was like, oh, this memory and that memory and a nice sentence here and there. But I hadn't tied it together because I refused initially to make it fiction. I thought that was dishonest. Oh no, I don't want to craft anything. I have craft because I've written plays. Oh, okay, plays. I went to Iowa Playwrights Workshop. I know how to write a play. Like I know how to like add in suspense. I know how to create momentum. I know how to build scenes. I know how to create this like sort of ebb and flow of like conversation. I know how to do all those things, but I sort of like said, well, that's not what they want. Like this is a memoir. It's got to be my life and the truth. And it is so what I came to accept and understand is that for it to be readable and cogent and coherent for the reader, I have to build in the structure to create that forward movement. That was all after the fact. There was no forward movement. It was static dioramas of David's traumas. That was the whole first draft. It was so boring, you can't even believe it. And I didn't know it was boring until I reread it. I was like, what is he talking about? He's crazy. I remember going from that meeting and I was like, ah. But then I read it and I was like, oh, of course. Like once someone gives you just one note, I mean, in a way he was brilliant because he just gave me that one note and it was all I needed because I was like, oh, I know how to do this. Like I'm actually quite capable. But now I know what the task is. I didn't know it was the task because I had never been there before. I'd never been to this continent of long form prose. So I had no idea what was being asked of me. But I was like, oh, he wants it to read like one of those books I read and I like. He wants that. Okay, I think I could do that. So then I began applying these like techniques that I have, you know what I mean? And things that I knew from writing plays. And the most important thing is that I started to view myself as a character. So I started to create this like binocular vision for myself so that I was both me and him. And I started to like sort of forge this kind of strange like this twinning in the writing. I don't know how to explain it. I said it to the class, it's like almost like I hit a chord or something on the piano. And I found this thing where it was like me and the character, boom, together. That created a new animation for the book, kind of. I can't really explain it. It just did something to the book, and it kind of sprung to life in a new way. But I should say, I did read Philip Lopate's book about memoir writing. I really like Philip Lopate. But he talks all about this retrospection, and Jonathan Burnham wanted me to do that. He's like, you gotta have more moments where you're like, what does this all mean? I never do that really in the book. I barely ever say like, looking back upon this moment, I realized da-da-da. I don't. I have an allergy to it. I find it really gross. So I just was like, I'm not doing it. He's like, you really have to ease into that gentle pedal. I don't know what he said to me, but he really wanted me to do that. So it's interesting that you say that you felt that there were moments of retrospection, because I sort of just keep it going. I sort of just wanted it to feel more like a novel than anything, and just a very granular novel about someone who has a lot of problems. And that's it. That's the plot.
We have time for a couple more.
I'm just curious, you mentioned Twitter a moment ago. I'm just curious because this spans obviously the childhood you're talking about, Billie Jean and everything else, a totally pre-digital, pre-social media world. And
now living in the world that we live in. So I just sort of want to put a question mark at the end of that and say, but was there something about recalling and going back into that world of your childhood that brought for you any kind of reflection on the mediation that we're now living with in terms of, and of course, all that super accentuated by the pandemic, I guess, but yeah.
I don't know if it sort of made me reflect on the digital like moment that we're in, but I definitely feel solace in that period. I think like I like things that are pre-social media. I like revisiting them. I write almost now exclusively period pieces because I don't like writing about people with cell phones. There's something about, I do have a deep fondness for that time, I guess. So, and I sort of conversely I'm always a little bit gawky with like, social media and this sort of optics saturated world that we're in right now. I can't fully get into it. I feel like a little bit of like a wallflower. And I think my whole generation, we kind of all a little bit feel like that. We're like, all right, we'll do it if we have to, but like, do we? So yeah, but I don't think that my book really prompted that kind of investigation for me, but I feel it.
All right.
I'll pass. Somebody else has a question.
No.
David, so you talked about how playwriting helped you to write the memoir prose. Did that work in reverse? Has the prose impacted your playwriting at all?
Oh no.
I was wondering if it's going to be just a resounding no.
No. But in terms of like narrative strategies, like learning the form, I feel like playwriting is so skeletal and like bare. You have to have craft to do it, because if you don't, there's nothing to hide behind. If like 5 seconds of a play doesn't work, the whole thing derails for the next 15 minutes. So I've learned, like, I'm very economical with how I make my plays. So that it definitely was a one-way street. Like it went into that, but the interiority, all the stuff that I loved doing in long form prose, I can't apply it. It will like screw up my plays. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I love it, but only there. Yeah.
Hi, David.
Hi.
Okay, so you just said something about, I don't know the exact phrasing, but that you could get one note and know how to apply it to everything. And I was just wondering if you had a specific piece of advice on not sounding trauma dumpy, I guess, because like I think what you like, even just hearing the little section made it really come to life, by the way. It was like a whole different experience for reading it.
Oh, good.
And yeah.
So your question is how to make your writing not so like trauma. I mean, there are people who think like, because I look at my reviews online sometimes and they're like, oh, he's so whiny. But I don't think I am. I actually don't think I am whiny. But I think that the reason why I don't think this comes off as a whining book, I definitely anatomize painful states. And I think a lot of people get very uncomfortable with that. So they call it whining because they're repressing their own experiences of pain. And then they want to sort of like lash out and punish someone who does it. That's different from someone who indulges in their pain and asks for pity for the reader. I don't ask for pity from the reader. I just want to explain what happened. And for me, the way I felt that I did it, I hope I did it, is almost like drawing still life. You just draw what's there. You just articulate and anatomize what is the next one. All right.
Just scream.
I think something died. Anyway. Oh, you want me to do that? Sure. Great. Oh, I sound so much louder. I'm just conscious. Yeah, I just think telling the truth and trying to find a zone inside your psyche that's objective and or as objective as you can make it without draining the personality from it. That's how you do it. Like when I write, and also not being afraid to be contradictory. Like when I write about my mom, she's really mean and she's really sweet and she's really fragile and she's really brutal. And I didn't try to make it coherent. It was more like I was doing like, cubism. It's like, here's this facet of her. I remember that. Now she's being mean. Okay, should I try to make a bridge? No bridge. Just do it. Just draw whatever you see and try to see yourself in that same way and extend, I think, who wrote The Situation in the Story? That wonderful writer. And she wrote
Gornick.
Fierce Attachment. Huh?
Gornick.
Yeah, Vivian Gornick. So in The Situation in the Story, which I think is a good book for people writing memoir, she does say, I believe, extend the deepest generosity to the people that you hate and the villains in your life, and then also be really, really hard on yourself. And I feel like that's what balanced it. Because in the beginning, I was so vengeful. Like when I was like, ooh, I get to write a book. And you know what I mean? I was so powerful. I was like sitting on my throne with my scepter. You're going to be sorry. You know what I mean? You do feel this like intoxicating feeling of like, I'm going to get back at you all. I've got this book, and then it's like, this is so bad. First of all, this is bad and bad writing. It's just terrible. It's like the worst parts of you. You know what I mean? So you want to write from the best parts of you, and you know what those are. And bad writing is bad writing, and you can just edit out anything that you don't like. And if you feel like it feels like you're dumping your traumas, it's just bad writing. It's not that there's not a nugget of truth in there, but figure out how to tell the truth in a way that resonates. That's my answer.
That seems like a great place to end. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you guys so much. I loved it.
Thanks for tail on the back. And David will be signing in a couple minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.